Hello and welcome to another episode of Top Deck, the series where we take a look at some of the leading TCG deck lists. So this time we have Nick's list from the LLDS in Basingstoke, where he took first place, playing Trickstar Sky Strikers, teched out with a few interesting bits in here. So let's run through the list, then we've got the sighting strategy and the rounds, and we can check out some of the answers to questions that I asked him. So we've got triple Ash Blossom, triple Droll, and double Ghost Digger, added in here some extra hand traps, two Sky Blaster, which is pretty interesting, a triple Candina, double Licorice, and one Lilybell, cutting this down to two because you don't really need the third anyway, and he's sacrificed some space there. Two Mind Controls in the main, triple Scapegoats, only one Afterburners and triple Hornet Drones for the search targets for the triple Engage, triple Terraforming, triple Night Stage is fairly standard, and then two Twin Twisters, which is pretty interesting, as we seem to be expecting back rid of that, double Impermanence, and triple Reincarnation. For the extra deck, we have Borosword, Firewall, Nightmare Package of Cerberus, Phoenix, Goblin, and Unicorn, so the standard lot here, a Link Spider, and a Link Rebo, each used for different uses with the tokens in here, one Hayate, and double Kigari, and one Shizuku. One Space Insulator still being played because you can make it with the Hornet, one Trisbana, and one Topologic Bomber Dragon, both of which you can trigger very easily with a lot of the cards in this deck. For the side deck, the third Ghost Digger, then he's got the Mech Knight engine that we saw him playing at UK Nats, so one blue, one indigo, and double purple. Then he's got triple Sphere Mode in here, triple Call by the Grave, one Twin Twisters to round out to three, and some Unending Nightmares in here as well, so very much some kind of meta call to deal with face-up spells and traps that he's potentially facing. So let's get on to the siding strategy next. So versus Mech Knight and Vote, going first, putting in the Mech Knights, and the Call by the Graves, taking out the Twisters, Ghost Diggers, Droll, and the Sky Blaster. I assume this is the case of you basically just pass the turn one, unless you think that you can play through anything by drawing the Call by the Graves, and then afterwards you sort of build yourself up, and it's exactly the same going second for the siding strategy, which kind of fits in with that. Then for the mirror match, going first, putting in the Call by the Graves and the one Twisters here, taking out the Ghost Ogres and the Impermanences, so basically just allowing you to set up a little bit more solidly with the Calls and the Twisters being able to remove potential scapegoats or whatever is being set and deal with the field spell too. For going second, he's putting in the Mech Knights. As we know, they're very strong beaters. We saw at UK Nats, the Mech Knight engine did really well for a lot of the players who came out in the top cut. He's also playing Call by the Graves and taking out the Ogres, the Impermanences, and the Twisters. None of them doing an awful lot when you're going second in the mirror match. Against Shadol Dino, going first, putting in the Call by the Graves for the hand traps, just taking out the spell trap removal and the Ghost Digger there. Second, exactly the same. For Goki, so one of the most important sighting strategies here, going first, putting in the Call by the Graves and the Ghost Digger, you basically just want ways to interrupt the combo so that they don't OTK you in there in the second turn of the game, and you need ways to establish yourself so the calls in there too. Twin Twisters doing nothing, of course, and Mind Control's also doing nothing when you're going first. Going second, putting in the Spear Modes and the Ghost Digger, that extra interrupt, very important. Taking out the Reincarnation, Sky Blaster, and the Twisters there. So keeping in one Sky Blaster, you can still essentially, potentially set up a big board and deal some hefty damage. For against Altergeist, putting in the Unending Nightmares and the Twin Twisters. I really like this option to put in the Nightmare actually, because you deal with so much of the problems that your opponent has, and you don't tend to worry too much about life points because your opponent is definitely going to be losing a significant amount of life points anyway, because you have access to things like Borosword and you're running the Trickstar engine. Going second, putting in the Mech Knights. Again, it's a kind of deck where they can struggle against some big monsters sometimes. They just have to force their way out of it, which is unfortunate, and with the Silkwitch's Bounce not really doing much against Mech Knights that can just come back the next turn, making me a big issue. Keeping in two of the Unending Nightmares and putting in Twisters as well, and then just taking out a bunch of the hand traps that don't really do very much. So Droll's coming out in both cases there. Then Tellarknights, this was actually an interesting deck that showed up at this LLDS. So going first, putting in the Unending Nightmares and the Twin Twisters, again, is sort of a back row heavy deck that sets up issues that you need to get rid of. Going second, it looks like the strategy is very similar to against Altergeist. So you're putting in the same cards, but you're taking out some things that are a bit different, because Droll is obviously quite good. So he's taking out the Sky Blasters, two of the Sky Blasters there instead. Finally, for against Pendulum, which can be a big issue for this deck, it's very difficult to push through it. So going first, he's putting in the Unending Nightmares, obviously, to pop those scales, very important. with the Twisters and the Ghost Ogre 2, taking out the Mind Controls and the Ash Blossoms. Ash Blossom not really doing anything unless they attempt to resolve Call, and then even then they've got resources available, otherwise they wouldn't commit to it. For going second, putting in the Sphere mode, you just need to be able to out the board and Ghost Ogre so that you can stop the combo. So that is it for the siding strategy. For the rounds that he played, round 1, this was his only loss from the event. He went up against Mech Knight Invoked and he actually lost this 1-2. Round 2, he beat Trickstar Sky Striker 2-0 in the mirror match there. Round 3, he won 2-1 against Shadol Dino. It can be a bit of a struggle sometimes when they do hand trap you, but clearly being able to side and play competitively against this. Round 4, 2-1 against Goki. Probably had a lot of playtesting against it beforehand to get himself ready for this. Round 5, 2-0 against Altergeist. And then into the top 4, he won 2-1 against Tellarknights. So yeah, Tellarknights made it into top 4 here at the Basingstoke LLDS. Very interesting that they've managed to push their way through. And in the final round, he won 2-1 versus Pendulum. This was being piloted by Alex Moffat, whose list you can see on the channel. So that is it. 1 loss from 7 rounds, so really solid looking, great looking list, and fantastic record. Let's get on to the questions that I asked him. So first of all, as per usual, I asked him how the event was. He said it was pretty good, quite small. A lot of his friends were there, so it was kind of like a locals for him. He opted to play the tricked out Trickstar Sky Strikers for this. He says that he's been testing other decks since Nationals for fun, including Pendulum, Burning Abyss and Pure Striker, but he went back to Trickstar Sky Striker because he expected a decent amount of Altergeist and Rogue, and if he just plays a deck that he's really comfortable with, then he should be able to win those matchups anyway. Then, as we saw in the main, he is running those Sky Blasters. He said that he wanted to try it for a while, and now that Hayate is out, there are better turn 1 plays with it, and Hornet Drones, which is really cool. For example, against Altergeist, he can make Phoenix Cerberus Goblin turn 1, and then they can't out it. Or against Goki, you can turn 1 Topologic Bomber Dragon with Drone Set, which is huge. But he didn't opt to play Sayuja, as he thinks that going all in is just potentially fix your hand really isn't worth it, given that they can stop you there. Then he's got the Mind Controls and the Twisters in here, which kind of suggests that he's making more of a going second build versus a back row heavy event. But obviously this is still Trickstar Sky Striker, so it's very much a going first deck. I wanted to know if he knew what kind of format he was heading into beforehand, or if there was another reason for running these cards. He always chose first with the deck still. Mind Control is just a power card that functions the same as Mech Knights in terms of pressure, but is more versatile. So previously, a lot of the Nats lists were running Mech Knights. So he's playing the Mind Control, and no, it's more generic, but it still applies the same kind of pressure that the Mech Knights did in the mirror match. Twin Twisters was specifically for Floodgate decks because he expected a lot of them to be there. And it's absolutely fine going first because they should be playing around Reincarnation anyway, so they'll be setting stuff from their hand. The extra deck looks very tight these days, especially given that Borosword has to be lumped in with this deck so that you can so don't miss out on those OTKs. He said that it's really tight. He had to cut Holy Angel for Hayate, which he missed only once during the day. Borosword was crazy good, and instead of Borreload, which he was never really making, he was making Borosword a lot. Borosword still outs Borreload, but you can also OTK super easy with it, and say Candina alongside it. Then obviously he mentioned Hayate being in the deck. It opens up a lot of the cool combos that are available. So I wanted to know if he was finding himself making those Nightmare combos. He said yeah, it makes it so that you can Firewall Loop off Hornet Drones and Candina without them giving you a single link zone. And Down Arrow is so good just for general link plays with the Nightmares that he was finding himself doing it a lot. Obviously, we saw the Mech Knights drop from the list since Nats. Just wondered if this was due to reduced expectation for mirrors. He said, yeah, he didn't really expect any mirror or many mirrors, but he still wanted the Mech Knights somewhere because they're the best cards for the mirror, and they're also decent against any back row deck to apply pressure before they get that engine going. As for the Sphere mode, obviously it takes up your normal summon, so that might have been potentially conflicting with the deck that does have those 9 important normal summons within the deck from Terraforming and the Field Spell, as well as Candina. He said that it's primarily for Goki, but he never drew it. It's usually fine using the normal summon for the Sphere, because you take away so much from your opponent with it. Then if you have something like Goats or anything like that, then you just follow up and you win anyway. As for the extra spell and trap hate that we got in the side deck from Unending Nightmare, He said, Altergeist seems like quite a popular deck now from the post-world type. An ending was for that or other floodgate decks in general, but it also serves as a trap for Pendulum, which is really strong when going first. As for changes that he'd made to the list, he kind of missed Call by the Grave in the main somewhere, so he'd like to fit that in, and he'd like the deck to be 40, because it is obviously a 41 list, but it depends on the event, as in a different scenario he wouldn't be maining the Twin Twisters necessarily. As for the hardest and easiest matchups, hardest matchups are the same as for any variant of the deck, so Pendulum is the hardest, then Gookie, then Mech Knight and Vote. The more hand traps in the main helps to stop the Pendulum and the Goki matches, and that's what essentially won him those matches. But the best matchups are Pure Striker, Altergeist, and any kind of slower deck in general. As for shoutouts that Nick wanted to make, shoutouts to all of his friends in the Next Central chat, and also to Team Harvard. So thanks very much for coming on and sharing your information. Congratulations on taking first place at the Basingstoke LLDS. A really nice looking list. Cool to see how it's evolved since the Nats format, given that all of these different decks are making their way into competitive play. And yeah, it's just generally interesting to see how you've tweaked things here and there to make it both more generic and also being able to combat that specific format. So hopefully you'll do well again in the future, and we may even see you again on the channel. Thanks very much for watching this video. If you're looking to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! But you don't have the money for an expensive deck, or there aren't any events happening near you, then Dueling Book Prize Tournaments is a brand new way to take part in competitive events from your own home. This is a Facebook group dedicated to running Premier level events, offering incredible prizes for cheap entry, and you don't even have to buy your own cards. As an example of just how high-end these tournaments will be, the winner of the first 32-person single elimination event will receive a super rare YCSW giant hand worth around £250. As a result, these events will include some of the greatest players of the TCG regions, and the roster is already filling up with giants of the game. For your chance to get involved in these tournaments, head over to the Facebook page by following the link in the description, and good luck in those events. Hopefully you do really well, and bring your decks onto Top Deck. Thanks for watching this episode of Top Deck. If you have any comments or suggestions that you would like to make, leave them in the comment section down below. Check out the description for details of how you can get involved in this series. You can enter by voice interview, or instead you could just send all of your information over Facebook Messenger. Anything like that will be absolutely fine. If you want to see anything in particular from the upcoming series, then be sure to get in touch, and I'll see you guys in the next video.